Hi, Kim Rainer here with All About Spirits, Life After Cancer, and I am here today with episode 34 of Life After Cancer. And if you have had a cancer diagnosis, you know that life throws you curveballs. Cancer impacts your social life, your physical life, your spiritual life. It affects your career. It affects every aspect of our lives. So each week at 10 o'clock on Monday morning Central Time, I create this show, lasts anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes, and it really offers the kind of support that I was looking for when I was going through my own cancer treatment and after my cancer treatment that I wasn't able to find. So as I said, this is episode 34, and this week's title is called 6 Tips for Supporting Someone After Cancer. Hi, Sue. Thanks for joining today. So today's show is called 6 Tips for Supporting Someone After Cancer. And I chose this topic for this week because I spent the weekend really supporting people. I have a friend who's in the hospital, and I went to 2 funerals over the course of the weekend, and there are a lot of different ways that we support people, and there's some really poignant things that we do when we're going through cancer and after cancer, and I wanted to talk about that. And I just want to say that these tips aren't necessarily only for people who are going through cancer. It really can be for anybody who's looking for support or needing support in some way, shape, or form. So that said, the first thing that I want to mention is that everyone is different and everybody's illness is different. So even if you've had the same kind of cancer that I've had, your experience with it might be completely different. I know ovarian cancer survivors who were able to step back into life right after their treatment was done, and they had no challenge or problem with that. And that wasn't my experience. So it's really helpful when you're supporting someone who's had cancer or anything else to really check in with them and really find out what's it like for you. Just because, I may have been able to bounce back from this part and you couldn't, that doesn't make me right and you wrong, or you right and me wrong. It just means that we're different. And when we're extending or offering support to people, our intention is to be supportive. If our intention is for anything other than that, if it's to try and change you, to try and change the way you're looking at things, the way you're dealing with things, then you might want to consider whether or not you're really wanting to support someone. So my first comment or my first tip is, if you are offering support to someone, make sure that the support that you're offering is really support and that it's not some way to try and change people or to try and convince them to do something different. The next thing that I want to mention is to stop telling horror stories. And I don't know why the tendency is to do that, but when we are diagnosed with cancer, or if somebody has a baby or we have a car accident, our tendency is to tell people all of the awful things that went on as a result of it. If you think about it in the context of pregnancy, I was in labor for 38 hours. It's like, okay, how is that helpful to the person that you're talking to? How is that supportive of them? How is that helping to lighten their load? How is that helping to ease their pressure? How is that helping to support them in the process? If they want to know what it was like for you, that's one thing, but I can't tell you how many people reached out to me when they found out that I had ovarian cancer, where they would start the conversation and say, "Oh, my grandma had ovarian cancer. She's dead now." Or, "Yeah, they had ovarian cancer too, and they got really, really sick from the chemo." It's like, okay, I appreciate that that's their experience, but that did not feel like support for me. What that did was activate my own fears. It plugged into the things that I was already scared of. What was much more helpful to me was somebody saying, "Oh, I know somebody that had that kind of cancer. Would you like me to put you in touch with them?" Because there are a lot of cancer survivors that are still alive. There are people who successfully navigate these processes without having horror stories. I had lots of experience with cancer, but I didn't really have horror stories. So putting people in touch with people who had a good experience is something that can be really, really helpful and supportive. The third tip that I would suggest is really to look at the person and what's going on and to listen to what they say, to really pay attention to the nonverbal communication that they're sharing with you. If they're telling you that they are absolutely fine and you go and you talk to them and it looks like they haven't taken a shower in a few days, their hair isn't done, their house is messy, that's an indication that what they're saying isn't really what's going on for them. And how do you support somebody through that? It's not necessarily that you're going to go in and swoop down and take care of them, which is so often our intention. You know, we want to go in and fix people. We want to go in and make things okay. It really is much more helpful to, if you notice things that need to be done, to really ask them. You know, I noticed that you've got some dishes in the sink. Did you want me to help you out with that? Can I take care of that for you? I have more energy than you. Can I help you with that? So finding ways to help and support them without being intrusive. There are some people who truly don't want to be supported. And honoring them in that space is really what we need to do. So we need to put our own agenda aside when we're thinking about how do we support and how do we help other people. And, you know, some people want to be cared for. Some people don't want to be cared for. So really pay attention to what's being said, and also pay attention to the things that your people aren't saying, that the people you're working for aren't saying. The next thing on my list is really to not assume that just because the person looks healthy and everything looks like they're okay, don't just assume that everything is fine. We are really good at masking what's going on for ourselves. We're really good at pretending that things are okay when they aren't necessarily okay. So I think that you know, it's not your responsibility to chase people around to find out how they're doing, but it's also not your responsibility to say, well, once the scar is healed or once the hair starts growing back, that everything is fine. We're really much better off actually having conversations with the people that we care about and asking them, geez, you look like your body is healing. How are you doing otherwise? You know, how are you doing emotionally? How are you doing? Do you have the same kind of stamina? And really ask them questions and invite them to have the chance to talk about what's happening for them. If they're struggling, they will most likely share that with you. And if they aren't struggling and they don't want to share it, then, you know, we learn how to respect boundaries with people. There's so much of support that as a caretaker, as a caregiver, you know, we are naturally caretakers and we want to fix things for people. And sometimes we can't. Sometimes we just need to hold the space for them to allow them to come to their own conclusions and to allow them to own the position that they're in this moment, and then to share about it from the heart wherever they are. The next thing that I would suggest is to keep visiting. You know, so many times after we look like we feel better, after, you know, the scars are healed and the hair has grown back, which are analogies that I often use because they're frequent. After we've come to the place where we're in a more, you know, we look more like we used to, people have a tendency to stop supporting us. They figure because we look like we're normal or we look like everything's okay, that we are okay. And that's not necessarily the truth. If you would have walked into my house when I was going through my cancer treatment, you would have found dishes in the sink. You would have found that, you know, my windows were dirty and that my house needed vacuuming. I mean, that was the reality of my situation because I didn't have the energy to do that. But the me that I presented to the world when I went out in public, I looked like I was okay. I looked like I felt fine, you know? So people had the expectation of me being able to be fine and me being able to move in the speed and context that I did before. And that's not necessarily the truth. We don't get to step back into life right away. I know that my oncologist told me that I could expect it to be 18 months before I was going to level off and hit my new normal. My hair was back long before 18 months was over. So the invitation is to really, you know, keep visiting, but also before you just drop in, check in first, you know, call and say, hey, I'm in the neighborhood. How do you feel about a visitor today? And, you know, so keep in touch with us, keep visiting, don't stop, but don't just drop in and show up either. And then the last thing that I want to talk about in supporting survivors is really considering the gifts that you bring or the things that you bring to their house when you come. A lot of times people bring food, which is really sweet and it's really considerate, but a lot of times our appetites aren't really what they used to be, so we end up with this stockpile of food in our refrigerator that we're not hungry for or we can't eat. So checking in, what do you have an appetite for if you're wanting to bring food? A lot of times soups are really a good thing to bring because it's light and it's easy and it's something that we can prepare for ourselves when we're actually hungry. Another thing is, if you're bringing food, really check in with them. What is it that you're hungry for? What would you like? And then portioning it out into plate-sized portions that can be frozen. That was so helpful to me because, I didn't have a lot of people that I had to have food for. It was just me and my son at the time, and then it became just me. So having little portions of food was really helpful for me. I could take it out and then I didn't get sick of one thing as I was eating it. So those were things that were really, really helpful for me. So just to recap them again, the first thing is to remember that everyone's illness is different. So don't assume that if you're a survivor of the same thing, that your experience is the same as theirs, because it might not be. So check in. The second thing is, don't tell us your horror stories of how Aunt Betty or Uncle Paul died of what it is that I have. That's not helpful to me and I don't want to hear about it. You might need to talk about it, and if you do, talk to somebody else about it. The next thing is to look and listen to what's being said, but also to pay attention to what's not being said. And then the next thing is, don't assume that just because we look like we're normal and everything is back to normal, don't assume that everything is, that we may not necessarily be healed to the level that we were before. The next one is to keep visiting us after we look like we're healed, but check in with us first to make sure that we're up to a visitor. And then the last thing is to really consider the gifts that you bring. And, food, having it come in small portions, having gifts that don't have a lot of smell to them is helpful, unless they specifically say, oh, I really love the smell of vanilla candles, or lavender oil is really helpful for me. Being mindful that we might be reacting to things differently than we used to. So, if you are post-cancer, or you're supporting someone who's post-cancer, or you're going through your treatment right now and you're not sure what to do, you're not sure where to go, I am happy to have conversations with you. I know coming up in the near future, I have a program that I'll be doing called Treatments Over What Now, and it really helps people navigate through the process of, I'm done with my active treatment and I'm really not sure what to do going forward from here. So if you are interested and want to know more about that program, or if you know somebody who might benefit from it, please feel free to reach out to me. I love hearing your comments. I love hearing your stories. And if you are a survivor, I'm in the process of putting together 1,000 stories of survivors. So I would love to have the opportunity to interview you, to talk with you, or to have you send me your own story in writing. And you can do that via my Facebook. You can send me a private message. You can post your comments after the Facebook post today. And I really appreciate you being here. And if you found something useful in this program, please share it with your friends, your family, like it. Share it on Facebook so more people can see it. And until we actually have a chance to talk, I really hope that life treats you well. Thanks for being here today, and make it